He hadn't eaten in 2 days, and the last $5 in his pocket was meant to buy breakfast for both him and his little girl. But when he saw her shivering in the corner booth, rainwater dripping from her tangled hair and tears mixing with the storm on the window, something inside him broke. And in that quiet, desperate diner, a single dad made a choice that would change his life forever. Before we continue, if you believe that one small act of kindness can echo louder than 1,000 selfish choices, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Because stories like this remind us that second chances are real, and sometimes they come when we least expect them. David Harper never imagined his life would shrink to counting coins at a greasy diner counter. 3 years earlier, he had been a warehouse supervisor with a steady paycheck, a modest home, and a wife who laughed easily. But a car accident took his wife in an instant, and medical bills swallowed everything he had saved. Grief hollowed him out. Then layoffs hit the warehouse, and suddenly he was a single father with no job and a 6-year-old daughter, named Lily, who still asked every night when mommy was coming home. They moved into a tiny apartment above an old hardware store. The heater rattled in winter and the ceiling leaked when it rained. David took whatever work he could find, unloading trucks, fixing fences, washing dishes, but it was never steady. Some weeks they ate well enough. Other weeks, he pretended he wasn't hungry so Lily could have the last piece of bread. That morning, the rain fell hard against the diner windows, blurring the world outside. Lily was at school, and David had just enough money for a simple breakfast sandwich and a cup of coffee. He told himself he needed the strength. He hadn't slept properly in days, anxiety twisting in his chest about the overdue rent notice folded in his jacket pocket. That's when he saw her. She sat alone in the far booth, soaked to the bone, her clothes worn thin, her hands trembling as she tried to warm them around an empty cup. People glanced at her, then quickly looked away. The waitress avoided her table. She looked lost, not just poor, but shattered, like someone who had fallen from a great height and never recovered. David tried to ignore it. He really did. He looked down at his plate when his sandwich arrived. The smell made his stomach ache with hunger. But then he heard it, a quiet, broken sob, not loud, not dramatic, just the sound of someone who had run out of strength. He stood up before he could change his mind. Without saying much, he carried his plate to her booth and gently placed it in front of her. For a moment, she stared at him in disbelief, her eyes red and swollen. He pushed the sandwich closer and offered a small, tired smile. He told her he was that hungry anyway. It was a lie, but it was one he was willing to carry. She hesitated, then took a bite, tears streaming down her face. David felt something shift in his chest, not pride, not regret, but a quiet sense of rightness. He finished his coffee, paid the bill, and walked out into the rain with an emptier stomach but a lighter heart. He didn't know her name. He didn't ask. He never expected to see her again. The following weeks were brutal. David's landlord gave him a final warning. Lily caught a fever that required medicine he could barely afford. One of his temporary jobs fell through. There were nights he sat at the kitchen table long after Lily fell asleep, staring at the unpaid bills and wondering how much longer he could keep pretending everything was okay. He questioned himself often. Had giving away that breakfast been foolish? $5 might not seem like much, but when you're hanging by a thread, every dollar feels like oxygen. Yet whenever doubt crept in, he remembered the woman's trembling hands and the way her eyes softened with gratitude. And somehow, that memory kept him steady. Then 3 weeks later, everything changed. A black sedan pulled up outside the hardware store one afternoon as David was returning from a job. Two sharply dressed men stepped out, scanning the building before walking toward him. For a terrifying moment, David thought it was about the rent, or worse, some legal trouble he didn't know about. His heart pounded as they approached. They asked for him by name. They introduced themselves as attorneys representing a woman named Margaret Whitmore. The name meant nothing to him. Then they showed him a photograph. It was her, the woman from the diner. Only in the picture, she looked different, elegant, composed, standing in front of a grand estate. The attorneys explained that Margaret Whitmore was the sole heir to a vast family fortune. After a bitter legal battle with distant relatives, she had temporarily lost access to her assets and had been forced to live quietly, even anonymously, while the courts finalized the case. The stress, betrayal, and public scrutiny had broken her spirit. She had wandered the city that rainy morning feeling abandoned and invisible. And then a stranger had given her his only meal. They told David she had never forgotten his face. In her lowest moment, when she felt the world had turned cruel and calculating, he had reminded her that goodness still existed. When her case was resolved and her fortune restored, she had hired private investigators to find him. It had taken weeks, but she had insisted. David stood speechless as they handed him an envelope. Inside was a letter, written in elegant handwriting, thanking him not just for the sandwich, but for restoring her faith in humanity. Along with the letter was a legal document establishing a trust fund in Lily's name, enough to cover her education, health care, and future. There was also a check, more money than David had ever seen, to clear his debts and secure a stable home. His knees nearly gave out. In the months that followed, David's life transformed in ways he could never have imagined. He paid off the rent and moved Lily into a small but warm house with a garden. He found stable work managing a community center funded quietly by Margaret herself. For the first time since his wife's death, he slept without the weight of fear crushing his chest. But the greatest change wasn't financial. It was the understanding that kindness is never wasted, that even when the world feels unforgiving, a single selfless act can ripple outward in ways we cannot predict. David eventually met Margaret again, not in a diner, but at the community center's opening ceremony. She thanked him publicly, but more importantly, she told Lily that her father was the bravest man she had ever met, not because he was wealthy or powerful, but because he chose compassion when it cost him something. Years later, when Lily graduated at the top of her class, David remembered that rainy morning and the hunger he had ignored. He realized that sometimes the smallest sacrifices carry the greatest rewards, not because we expect them, but because they shape who we become. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Your support helps keep stories of hope alive. And before we end, I have a special request. Comment the word kindness below if you believe one good deed can truly change a life. Because somewhere right now, someone is standing in a diner, holding their last $5, deciding whether to walk away or step forward. And maybe, just maybe, their choice will start a ripple that changes the world.